but actually it's more woven together by me. The different parts. He wrote his part in I think 1997, a few years after my mom passed away. He started writing, and the first thing he wrote was just his story about leaving Vietnam and building a life in the States, but it was very fragmented. It was called The Pink Lotus. And when he self-published that, I didn't actually pay that much attention to the book. I kind of read some of the important parts, but I knew, the key points of his story, but I didn't really read it completely. And then I traveled to Vietnam and lived there a few times in my 20s. And I remember one time being in Hoi An with a good friend of mine, and I said, I didn't even know why I said this, but I said, one day I want to write a book about my father's life. And then it just kind of was in the back of my mind somewhere in my subconscious. And when I was in Vietnam the third time, I started probably late 20s, early 30s, so 12, 15 years ago. I started writing about Vietnam as well, and also about my mom, who passed away when I was 14. But I also didn't do anything with that writing, and I spent a lot of time working on that. When I moved back to San Francisco, I would write every day before work, and it was all about Vietnam. And yes, I just left it. I left the manuscript, didn't do anything. And a few years ago, I was at a conference with my dad. Actually, he asked me to go to this conference. It was a Texas Tech University conference for the Vietnam Center, but it was in Orange County. And he never asked me to do anything. So I thought, if he is asking me to do this, I should really go. And I did. And I heard him speak on a panel about two Vietnams. And it was just so beautiful. And in that moment when he spoke, I realized that the why I never did anything with my writing is because it wasn't complete without his. I needed to interweave his story with my story. And then that's our complete Vietnam story. So that's where this idea of my Vietnam, your Vietnam, how that came about. And the book is alternating chapters between my father's voice and my voice. And it goes through different phases, from like when he left, like his leaving Vietnam, and then my going back to Vietnam as a young adult. And then also he talks about his upbringing in Saigon, and also building a life here in the States as a medical doctor. And then my story is always about the return, like the 3 different times I returned to Vietnam. Um, yes, so I'm really happy with it. He didn't know what I was doing when I started doing it, so I would just ask him for more details about the Pink Lotus story, basically, and I didn't tell him what my intention was. I think he thought I was just reworking his story, and actually he didn't see the final until I already had a publisher, and I just shared the final manuscript with him, and thankfully well, I don't know if he liked it or not, but he approved it, and he didn't ask me to change anything. So that was, I've said in a couple events the last few days that I think that there was a lot of sort of graciousness and generosity flowing back and forth between my father and I think he thinks of this as a gift for me to allow the story to be presented in a way that I want. And I really view it as a gift for him, because he's written so much and researched so much about Vietnamese history. I think he has finished close to like 20 books, but I don't think that many people are really, really interested in, picking up historical books about Vietnam unless you're a historian. So for me, I thought that this book would bring more attention to his voice. And so far it's been a really beautiful experience. Every event has brought up just different conversations, a lot about intergenerational healing, a lot of similarities in the sense that the distance with our parents, and the trauma and the silence of trauma, and younger people really trying to reconcile their relationships with their parents and understanding why their parents are. So almost daily I get a message that it's just does he not talk? I'm curious.
Vietnamese family trauma.
I know. It's like this is the first audience. It's been almost all Vietnamese, and it's really, but it comes up a lot, and but it was really interesting because I think on Thursday night in Santa Barbara, a young Vietnamese man came up to me afterwards and said, really proud, really sweet. But he's like, it's not just Vietnamese people. Other people have trauma too, and other people, and the silence of trauma it's not just us. And just kind of in a proud way that it isn't just us. It's not just Vietnamese people that have trauma and that have distance within families and households. So I appreciated that he made that point. So yes, I'll just read something short to start off that my dad wrote that I thought was really beautiful. And also, I just wanted to. Last night it was really funny because there was an older man in the audience who I the audiobook narrator was moderating, and she read this part, and then this man in the audience just like fell in love with my dad's voice, and he came up to me afterwards. He was like, "Your dad," and then later she read something that I wrote, and he's like, your writing's like more psychological, but your dad is like could be like Hemingway, and your dad should continue writing, and your dad is so emotional." And I'm just, but it was really sweet that my dad's voice really resonated with him. And my dad is a great writer, and he actually wrote all of this in English. He did not write it in Vietnamese. It wasn't translated. And he is a great writer. But I'll just read this short piece about that he actually read to his medical school reunion. I think it was a 25th reunion in Northern Virginia. And I'd never heard, my dad doesn't really speak that much. Like Chris you can vouch for this, right? Yes. Yes, he doesn't really, this is my cousin Chris, and his dad is older brother is very gregarious. Your dad is just like, yes, no, I mean, they're just so different. You put that, and I'm like, how did they come from, so it also shows that people who experience like similar trauma, their responses are different. It's not always one. Yes, because I always look at Chris's dad as just like, oh, texting a lot, sending random messages, and has a great sense of humor, whereas my dad is very, very quiet and stoic. But this is what he read. So anytime the only times I've heard him speak publicly, it always really moved me, and I knew he was like such a deep man, because the first time was my mom's funeral. The second time was what I'm going to read here, had his medical school reunion, and the third time was at his mom's funeral, and then the fourth time at the conference. And every time it just really touches me. So once upon a time, I was born in one of the most beautiful countries on earth. Unfortunately, this country was divided and slowly devastated by one of the longest wars in history. I was baptized during the war, lived and grew up with the war, and only escaped after the war ended. I saw my country divided into two, with nearly 1 million people fleeing the communist north to make a new life in the Pacific South. I struggled through school and college amidst the background of war, revolution, uprising, uncertainty, and devastation. Upon graduation, I was drafted into military service to serve my country. Soon the war ended with the collapse of my homeland. It was then my turn to flee the communist regime. And along with another 100,000 people, I jumped onto a boat and drifted toward the unknown, knowing only that I had lost my homeland, my family, and my way of life. What struck me most in this small boat on the empty and vast sea was not the fact that I had lost my identity, but the fact that for the first time in my life, I had gained the freedom I had longed for, the inner peace that I had always dreamed of. I landed in a vast, modernized country, the most advanced on earth, in a country totally different from my former one in thinking, customs, and way of living. Through many grueling and difficult years of retraining, which did take a toll on myself and my family, I settled down in a small town trying to make sense of my life. The scenario repeated itself 1,000 times all over the world for my former countrymen. On this day before Labor Day, 30 of my classmates gathered here in Virginia to celebrate their first class reunion in a quarter of a century and to share their perspectives. This letter is dedicated to our families and loved ones who lost their lives in search of freedom, our colleagues and countrymen who could not escape and are still enduring the communist regime in Saigon, and my classmates of the University of Saigon School of Medicine. I share their struggles, their pains, their fears, and their home, but I did not know then that we could have gone this far. And then I'm now Linda and I are gonna go back and forth, so I'm gonna let Linda come up and.
everybody. It's been interesting because this is the final show of our mini tour, and it's been amazing. All the shows have been packed, but it's very daunting to play in front of family. And to talk, it's one thing to talk about your family history with, a room of strangers, and it's another thing to try to talk about it in front of you guys. So I'm going to pretend like I don't know anybody here. Thanks for coming. So Christina and I know each other. We met years ago in San Francisco, just through friends. It was at a time before she published a book, and I remember her telling me, I'd like to publish a book someday. And I remember thinking, well, good luck, in the sense that everyone who's a writer, that's everyone's dream, and not many people see that into reality. And at that time as well, I was aspiring to be a touring musician. And now it's been really beautiful to reconnect after many years and to be doing what we love and to kind of come together to celebrate her phenomenal book in our respective art forms. I read her first memoir last year, and I remember thinking, God, I hope I like my friend's book, or at least please help me not like it, if that makes sense. Because you always hope your friend's art is something you genuinely like. And it blew me away. Her writing is absolutely amazing and relatable. And then when she said last summer that she was going to publish a second memoir, I instantly reached out and I said, would you like to do a co-tour and where we share about our respective family histories? And so it's been beautiful, a beautiful experience. So for those of you up here who don't know me, my name's Linda, and my music project, my band, is called Seenight, S-E-E space N-I-G-H-T. And I am half Vietnamese, half Caucasian. My parents met in the Vietnam War. Awkward. And I used to say as a kid jokingly that I was a product of the Vietnam War. My father was a Navy helicopter pilot for the US Navy, and my mom was a Vietnamese woman in Saigon. They met there, and then my mom fled Vietnam with my Vietnamese family as Christina's father fled as boat refugees in 1975, and then they were reunited, my father and my mother, in America and California, and then my sister and I came about. So something that I never publicize, and only on this tour have I talked about, is that my band name, Seenight, the root of it is, it was named after the helicopter that my father flew in Vietnam, which was called the Seenight, S-E-A space K-N-I-G-H-T. And as well, to pay homage to my Vietnamese side, for music, I use the name Linda Sao, and S-A-O is my Vietnamese grandmother's name. And so it's just kind of been this private, personal acknowledgement of both sides of my family that only now and on this tour do I talk about. So what I did was I curated a few songs to play for these events that I felt I've written. They're all original, and I kind of just chose songs that I felt resonated with the themes of Christina's book. And so this first song is a recent song I wrote, and it has to do with intergenerational trauma, relationships with our parents, and kind of that essence that I think whether you're a child of an immigrant or a refugee or not, I think most people can relate to the feeling of, wanting to be closer to our parents, but somehow being unable to break that silence or that tension that can come up. It's called Timeless Debt. And I just think of it as, like what I've been saying at these events is, we all, I think, grow up to try to become loving adults and to heal the patterns of our family. And then sometimes you hit a point where you're like, as much meditation as I do and as zen as I think I am, you walk into that house where your parents are, or you talk to your parents and you just become this person that maybe you're not always so proud of. And it's a journey. So you wanna be good, just like you always thought you would be. afraid. And the same timeless debt you can repay. Thanks, guys. The second song that I'm going to play relates to the for me that I really picked up on, and that is Christina's father's half of the book and his love for Vietnam. And as she will probably say more, he's a very silent man and not expressive, as we can probably relate to. Um, amazing love that he has. And he left this country and his homeland with I think a sense of love for America eventually, and an optimism around this new life, this forced new life. But there's always a sense of longing for Vietnam. And so I picked this song that I wrote a long, long time ago. It's called Gravity, and it relates to that sense of moving forward, but longing for the past, whether it's a person or place. And so in this iteration of performance, I think of it as through the lens of her father's memory. This place seemed yellow from my sorrow, but it dims away. Pale in comparison, was I mistaken? Pale in comparison, was I mistaken? The gravity of tomorrow pulls yesterday to sleep, but you were immovable, like a chess piece. Pale in comparison, was I mistaken? And Christina's going to come up.
Normally we do a Q&A, but I don't know. It's so different. This time it's like so different to see so many Vietnamese men to know that they're Linda's fam. So I know this, it feels difficult to do a Q&A in a way, but I don't know if anybody has any questions. Yes, but I don't know. I just want to, I don't know. I just like to try to interact at least. If any, well, I'll say about that it's definitely a very experimental book because in terms of the literature of the Vietnamese diaspora, this type of book hasn't been done. There's a law professor who wrote something with her teenage daughter, but it wasn't about really about Vietnam. I think it was just about being in their relationship in the States. So that's another reason I'm proud of this, and it's been really interesting in these last events because I've encountered people that it's fascinating really because so for example like last Friday was the 30th anniversary of my mom's death, and I had an event in Phoenix and I was able to meet her best friend, like her very 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 best friend who I haven't seen in 2 decades. She just lives there, and we got to meet it. She's Korean, but we met at a Vietnamese restaurant and we ate together, and it was so wonderful. And even this week in Santa Barbara, I met a Vietnamese woman who graduated the same year as I did at the University of North Carolina, which is a large school, 24,000, around 24,000 undergrads. But it was just interesting because we were there at the same time. This other Vietnamese who I never met, I actually didn't have that many Vietnamese friends in college until I went to Vietnam. And then last night I met another Vietnamese woman who grew up in Southern Indiana as I did. And so there are all these and then at the Santa Barbara event also, it was so sweet. There was a 14-year-old girl who wants to be a writer and a musician. And I just saw in like my 14-year-old self. So it's almost like all of these events have been there have been some like sense of like parallel, like these people who've lived kind of parallel lives in a way, like there weren't that many Vietnamese people in Southern Indiana. So meeting this woman who graduated the same year of college as me, this 14-year-old, my mom's best friend, my cousin and his family being here today. So it's been really like uh, it's been like a ceremony, a beautiful like healing ceremony, all of these experiences. So it's been quite special. And my dad is coming to Santa Fe um, next week, and we have an event together on Saturday at the library. So I'm excited. I don't know how that's going to go. I didn't tell him that I want him to speak, and he's on the flyer to speak, but he doesn't know that. I mean, he'll be happy to speak. He when he speaks about Vietnam, he is so passionate. But yeah, maybe I'll read. I don't know. I feel like reading what he read at my mom's funeral, and this was the first time I heard him speak in public. And it was like it was jarring and kind of shocking. So on behalf of Lynn, I would like to thank all of you who came from as far as France, Switzerland, California, Louisiana, and Illinois, as well as locally, to pay tribute to a wife, a mother, and a friend. If I had to write a book about her, I would have entitled it If Life Was a Cross, for God knows how many crosses she had to carry during this journey on earth. She was born 48 years ago in Cambodia from a third generation of Vietnamese who had settled there many years ago. There was always animosity between the Vietnamese and Cambodians. To escape persecution, she had to flee Cambodia in 1972. I first met her at the University of Saigon in 1973, and later we got married. In 1975, after the fall of Saigon, she was left stranded in Vietnam and had to suffer under the communist regime. The loss of her first child at that time added to her suffering. She gathered herself, became a staff physician at the French Girl Hospital, and earned enough money to pay her way out of Vietnam. How many people have been persecuted in 2 different countries like her? She joined me in the US in 1976. My training led us to Connecticut, New York, and Utah, and she faithfully followed me everywhere without asking any questions. We settled in Tennessee for 5 years before moving to Indiana. In 1993, she was struck with colon cancer. which is rare among the Asian population. She required 2 operations before receiving chemotherapy weekly for 8 weeks. The medications made her uncomfortable for 2 or 3 days following each treatment, and she would stabilize for a few days before the next treatment began. She lost her appetite and her weight. Cancer went into her right hip and caused her to have a tremendous amount of pain. She could barely lift a leg at times. She had to take radiation treatment daily for 3 weeks. Cancer reached her liver, and she received radiation treatment for 2 more weeks while still getting her chemotherapy. The cancer went into her lungs, causing her to cough continuously and to become short of breath. She suffered 6 more days in the hospital before God took her away. I asked myself, how much more can a person endure without falling apart? Life was a cross, and she carried her cross valiantly and courageously. She was a good natured person, one of those rare people who would give her own clothes away if need be. If someone gave her one thing, she would give him or her tenfold in return. Her mother came from Paris to visit during her illness. Despite her disability and pain, she gladly took a 5-hour round trip to Cincinnati to pick her up first, then drive her back. She would make sure that her mother had 3 daily meals. How could anyone do more than that? Lynn, you are now lying peacefully in front of us. Finally, you do not have to worry about pain, cough, constipation, nausea, loss of appetite, all these physical disabilities that wore you down. You suffered long and hard enough. You carried all your crosses so valiantly and courageously and for so long. And for that, I know that God will put you among his angels. I know that was that was the first time I heard him really speak, because I grew up when he was so, we didn't really interact much, and just through my mom. So when she passed away, we kind of lost that lifeline to him. Um, so yeah, I would love to somebody ask a question and have a conversation.
What's your favorite dish?
Thank you. I remember, well, now that it reminds me of a story, because we would often visit uh, Chris and his family. They lived in New Orleans, and we always lived in small towns with like 1% Asian population, no Vietnamese people. And then when we would go visit Chris, and we would finally have Vietnamese food. And I remember once we went to get pho with your dad in the morning. I don't think you were there for some reason, but I asked Chris's dad, like, why are we eating this soup in the morning? And he said, oh, just if you went to Vietnam, you would understand. And it was so true, because when I went to Vietnam and first living in Hanoi, when it was cold and it was just, and you're on a motorbike, and having this bowl of pho in the morning was so like nourishing when it's cold outside, and then you have this hot broth. And so I don't know, you just made me remember this about your thank you. That's
Is that your go-to dish? What
ah
would you order? Okay, one more meal.
one more meal.
You're in jail.
Probably. Yes. Yeah. So the first time I was 22, I think. It was, I worked for a year after college, and then that's the first part of this book, because actually I remember we had to do, it was I worked for a pharmaceutical company, and I was at this retreat with everybody in the marketing team, and everybody had to go around. There was a coach there who's asked everybody to share like what their most memorable, their best time of their life. And I was just a recent college grad, and then most of these people were probably in their 40s, late 30s, 40s, and everybody mentioned something like of around college, or or they were in a band before, they were an athlete, or they traveled post college. And I just sitting with them, I thought, I can't have this future, like working just in one company, and then I didn't see it. So I don't even know where that idea came from, but in that, when I shared, I said, I'm going to live and work in Vietnam. But I just said it. I had no plan. But then I basically was like, oh, I'm going to leave. I mean, I said it with my boss and in front of everybody that I was going to leave. And then from that moment, I made an effort to try to find an internship. And this was at the time, this was 2002. So one was just using calling cards. I would go to the Asian market. There was no Skype or any, so I would go to the Asian market and buy these calling cards to Vietnam. And at night, I would call different organizations And then actually one day, I was at Starbucks and I overheard this man talking about his friend Chad, who worked for the Asia Foundation in Hanoi. So I called the Asian Foundation and Chad, they eventually put Chad on the phone, and then he helped me um, get an internship at UNDP. And then he actually became one of my closest friends, is still one of my closest friends today. And yeah, and when I went to Vietnam, it really, because before that, I didn't really have that many Vietnamese friends or access to Vietnamese culture, wasn't brought up speaking Vietnamese. And I went back 3 times. So I went to live and work there. That was the first time. And then I lived 6 months in Hanoi and then a year in Saigon. I worked for an advertising agency, and then I came back like 3 years later, worked for UNICEF. And then I came back like I think a few years I was there only for like a year and a half with UNICEF, and then left, and then came back, and then eventually went to San Francisco for a decade. But it really, it was life altering for me. And there's one part in this book where I'm getting ready to leave, and I go back to my dad's and my stepmom at the time, and this was in Indiana, and we went to this like buffet where there are the other Vietnamese women, and they're like kind of making fun of me, like, oh, why does she want to go back? Why does she want to go back to Vietnam? Like, they don't even have like proper bathrooms there, and she's too American, and she'll just come back. And my stepmom at the time kind of stood up for me, and I was right about that. It changed my life, and it was really formative for my adulthood, I would say. I still don't speak Vietnamese well, which is unfortunate, but yes, it was life altering.
How has, like, in the process of writing the book, how has your relationship changed with your dad, or has it?
I mean, we have more to kind of communicate about because we just like communicate a little through text and not even like direct text. Like his current partner, the 3 of us, even though she doesn't really write anything in the text group, it's so interesting. Like it stays with the 3 of us. She doesn't really comment, but it's my dad and I. It's almost like we have like a moderator there, even though. But this book like has given us more to communicate about. So every time something, there's a review or something positive, there's something that I can share with him, and that's really special. And recently he wrote something back, which this is how I perceive the book, and I appreciated that he sent me a text that said, "Oh, this is like, it's a beautiful gift to give to the community." And that's also how I feel now, that it's more, and also what I see through these events, that it's like a good conversation piece, right? People can give it to their parents. And one lady said she gave it to her dad, her parents, and her mom doesn't read English, so the dad is translating it into Vietnamese during their story time together. It's I know. So they're like daily story time. He's reading her this book. And yeah, and also just the young people, like there's always 1 or 2, and I'm so touched by them because they buy the book for their mom. And I don't know, it's because it does cross that intergenerational divide, because it's 2 different perspectives of Vietnam, and that's why I appreciate it. And there was one review, I can look at it on my phone, that was really beautiful, but I'll just summarize, that basically said, that these are like our 2 different Vietnams, but the book comes together and forms a third Vietnam, through this conversation that the father and daughter have about Vietnam. So, yeah, I hope it brings healing to people. It has for me. I don't know, I can't speak for my father, but for me, it's really changed it's so beautiful. Like I just even what I mentioned, just these people that I've encountered, right, that have kind of were parallel to me in a way. And then I always wonder, like, oh, what if I knew that more Vietnamese people in Southern Indiana, when I met that woman last night, what if I knew that more Vietnamese people, or was closer to them in college, like the woman who graduated the same year with me? What if when I was 14, when I lost my mom, and I had a mentor, I had somebody who was what I wanted to be and could communicate, like how my life would have changed. But then I thought it doesn't really matter, because I'm content with my life now. And even if it would have been nice to have those people, um, now, I met them now, and it's all fine. And I feel good about that. And also just all this book, all the events and like the connections with Vietnamese community, it's just, and the support from Vietnamese community, from different organizations, from people, from the audiobook narrator to just people who are in the space, like podcast hosts, other artists, other writers. I feel my life has been like flooded in with love because of all these, I think, holes that I've had throughout my life. And then the completion of this, which is then my way of transforming that pain into art. And then I think naturally, just the laws of the universe, it comes back. It comes back in another form that I created this and something has to come back to me, and it's love. And it's really special. Sorry, Graham's tired. Oh, but yeah. So thank you. I'll pass it back to Linda if there are any other questions. Otherwise, we'll just, yes, have Linda close. Do you have a question, Chris?
Your first time in Vietnam, did you have stomach issues? You were speaking of-
No. No. I did in
You should be scared.
I did in Cambodia, not in Vietnam. Are you guys gonna go?
What entity? I think deeply.
Just gonna do one more song, and then I think hopefully Christina's gonna sign some books or sell some books. I think that's interesting. So this is a song that I wrote like 15 years ago. I've only played it once ever, aside from this tour, and I didn't think I'd ever play it again. Funny enough. Luckily, I played it at the only show that my parents ever went to, and like 15 years ago, and what I told Christina, I was like, I have this song about Vietnam, and it's really cheesy though. I don't know if I don't know. And she was like, oh, everything Vietnamese is cheesy. That's great. So, anyways, what my family that's here will like this story or appreciate it is it shocked me after my parents came to the show in Santa Cruz where I lived at the time. After the show, I was visiting them, and my dad asked me about the song, and he told me, he said, yeah, I teared up from that song, which was super powerful because he's not, he's a conservative Navy man and not an emotional man. And for him to say that he cried from the song was like so moving. So it's called Vietnam, creatively titled. Also, I want to apologize to Sam and Arvita because I discovered you guys because I came to donate. My father passed away in the fall, and I came to donate his books. So if you saw an uptick in conservative war books, that was my dad. So I'm gonna see it. Loneliness and family, holiness and blasphemy, everything and nothing, nothing and everything. Sitting low is beneath a tree that reaches beyond tragedy, 'cause you are so much more. You are so much more than a war. Loneliness and family, holiness and blasphemy, everything and nothing, nothing and everything. Mama, won't you show me where you used to bike these streets back then? You hopped a boat away from home. There's so much left to be unknown, 'cause you are so much more. You are so much more than a war. And Daddy, won't you show me where you used to walk these streets back then?
away from home. There's so much left to me unknown. 'Cause you are so much more. You are so much more. You are so much more than just. You are so much more than just. You are so much more than just. Toil in a treasure's land. You still give from earth to man. You swirl around with ancient wings and land me back to ancient things. 'Cause you are so much more. You are so much more. You are so much more than just. You are so much more than just. You are so much more than just. Loneliness and family, holiness and blasphemy, everything and nothing, nothing and everything in me, in me.
Thank you. Thank you guys for coming. Really sweet. I guess now, if anyone wants to buy books from Christina and has any questions, feel free. And thank you, Sam. Thank you, Arvita. It's such a beautiful space. And everyone, please come back, buy books here, hang out. It's a wonderful space, and there's cafe in the daytime and everything. So come back.